So let it be written, so let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors, and we are live here with your questions. This is a live Q&A. This is a flu-and-A, because I've had the flu, and one of the things that I am interested in doing is I just wanted to talk to human beings that weren't someone from a Netflix television show.
Just a little bit of human interaction. Maybe.
Some human interaction. So this is me crawling out of my cave. Good week so far?
Oh, sorry. Is that a question?
I was really kind of just talking to myself.
Well, so because I was going to say, depending on when your week starts, I'm like, yeah, so far the first day of my week has been great for the last 16 hours.
How has your week been?
By Q&A, we meant that Tim would ask questions and answer his own questions to himself.
We'll just hang out with him while he does.
I definitely at some point am going to put this lip moisturizer on, which is a essentially, as you get a fever, your lip decides that it wants to shatter and shred into 15 different sections, and it hurts. And this is just so that you can sort of grout that together and make it shiny so that everybody knows what happened. To rip off a Mitch Hedberg joke, he's like, "Hey, y'all want to use some Carmex, also known as cold sore highlighter?" All right, so hey, PC Rage 2000, love you too. PC Rage 2000 says love you. Let's jump into some questions. I know we had some. This was a very last minute thing. So we did post in the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group, and we got some questions on both the event as well as I posted a separate post. Luckily, James and Jeff have it together enough to actually gather those answers or those questions so that we can answer them. Jeff, what do we got?
So the first question is from Dwayne. And it says, of all the characters that you've played, which were your favorite and why?
What about you, James?
So this is a hard one because I don't really consider my own character, right, when I play a lot of the time. Like when I think back on games, I mostly think that game was fun and I was a part of it. But I feel like for me, somewhat in contrast to maybe a lot of people, my character is an NPC that I play. It's not me. I don't know. I think of it so differently. And until you asked me, I didn't really think about it. But I would say some of my favorites were some of the first characters I ever made. So like way back. And this guy comes up on the stream all the time. I was quite young.
Can I guess?
And, oh, yeah. You know who it is. He's a classic, man.
Charisma Mysterious.
That was, the name of one of my very first, D&D characters. This was back in 3.5.
Which, if you're not putting that together...
I might have been 13 years old. I don't know.
if you're not clocking that it's Charisma Mysterious...
Yeah, that I did the thing where you type the words in Microsoft Word before you had the internet, and you go, how could I turn this into a cool name? That was one of my favorite characters, mostly because it was the first character I got to play the most. And so a lot of my firsts were with that character. Even my first real combat, my first real story arc, that sort of stuff. So for me, hands down, Charisma Mysterious is one of my favorite characters I ever played.
What about you, Jeff?
It's tough because there are so many different characters I played in so many different contexts. It's hard to pin down my favorite for what, because I've gotten a lot of different things from different characters. If I had to pick just one, I'd probably say my character in I played in an online game, Vampire the Masquerade, that Rob from the channel Performance Check ran. Super, super great game. My character is Siegfried in that game. Just because it's weird. I don't play in a lot of modern settings, but there's something I think that you get in a modern game that you don't get in fantasy games, which is sort of a relatability to your character and the sort of struggles that are much more closely connected to your own. So I basically got to play a character who had a lot of similar personality quirks and life struggles that I, as a real person, have. So kind of getting to work through those issues with less of a mask between, was really enjoyable for me to sort of be able to step firmly into the character's shoes in a way that I haven't really been able to. You can imagine what it's like to be, a knight in a fantasy setting, and you can kind of get there, but it's difficult to like feel intensely that same thing without putting like a lot of work into like developing that connection. So just being able to have a person who's like, I know exactly who they are, exactly how their struggles are, and getting to work through them is very cathartic to, my own issues in actual life. So that connection was like really interesting and special, I think.
Cool. I think we'll wrap it up there. No. I think, I'm not afraid to give what would seem like the obvious answer, which is my favorite character that I've ever played is a character called Durgan Bloodmountain in the Provokers. It represents a lot of things for me. It's the first time I believe I ever started role-playing, probably in my life. So that is really special. And sort of the character had this really cool, at least to me, fun way that he could either be really funny, but wasn't necessarily sarcastic. So it wasn't like humor at the expense of others. It was usually just like sort of like good-natured humor, which is very rare. It's one of the reasons why I love a show called The Mighty Boosh, is that it's like the opposite of cynical. And but then also he had a very serious side, and it's probably one of the only times in a game that I felt like it was a totally separate character. Like, it kind of, Jeff, to take a step away from what you're saying, I didn't feel like I was playing myself. I felt like I was playing this totally different dwarven paladin, which is really cool. So Durgan Bloodmountain on the channel, A Fistful of Dice on YouTube. The entire Provokers Season 1 campaign features Durgan, especially that first episode when I had internet made out of dirt and hair, and I sound like a robot. So go check that out on A Fistful of Dice. What's going on, Hellmage? Hellmage is here. He is...
you actually...
Go on.
Oh, yeah. You just brought up a good point about the concept of... That was the first time you role-played. And I didn't really think about that because it's weird because I don't know if there are a lot of people now or like in the sort of circles that I play that have played D&D as a game where you don't role play the way that we do now, right? Like when I found out that people were doing what we now call D&D, that's not what we were doing before. It was cool and it was fun, but it was more like a board in a sense. So it's interesting that you bring that up because I'm like, man, yeah, I remember thinking D&D was cool, but then when I got to actually role play, I was like, this is a totally different thing,
Yeah, and I got to give credit to Barker from the Ignite Inspire the Story channel, that he is the one. We did round robin introductions in the tavern, classic tavern, and kudos to Matt for not being afraid to start off with a trope, and it didn't matter. It doesn't matter. So we're going round robin, and then Barker went before me, and I was like, oh my God, this guy is going for it.
Exactly.
I was like, people act like this, and other people are okay with it?
We get to do that?
Yeah, right. So then, let me make it 10 times worse, and you've heard this story, but I'll be quick. So then it's my turn, and I decide at the last minute, like right then, I decide I'm going to do a Scottish accent, and I'm going to go as hard in the paint as this guy, because I really didn't know Barker super well. And this is what happened. My internet crapped out. And so I'm like, oh, Durgan Bloodmountain, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I could see the face of the players trying to kind of the robot voice, like, oh yeah, it's fine. No, it's fine. We're not going to. And so I'm like, oh no, they hated it. I'm dumb. I'm the worst. And then I think the end caught in, and then Matt picked it up. And then from there, the whole thing was history. But yeah. You're right. It was kind of like the awakening of oh, we could totally do this. So I was really, I dug it. We have some more questions here, but I just want to say quick shout out to Josh Hulls. What's up, Josh? Manuel, what's going on, Manuel? And NPC number 746862, who had bad luck with the alcohol in the gel. Got to watch where you put that stuff. You'll find every paper cut.
All right, so we have another question from Dwayne, part 2. Please tell us about a in a truly epic moment, either fail or win in a game that you were a part of. What made the moment so memorable for you?
You want to take that one, Jeff?
Nope, not yet.
Yes. What about you, Jimbo? Jimbo Rimbo Rye.
Well, I have one that I always go to that I've learned is like the one, but I refuse to tell that story again, and it is of course the Winds of Cerceline game.
It's new to me.
Like last live stream, but no, I was trying to think of even in the same thing. So I think it was epic moments, but stretching that a little bit to remove it a little bit from the game, because again, that's kind of a question we've had a few times, and so what I'll say instead was the idea that I got to sit. So Tim played in the Provokers, and we were, Tim and I were very close at the time. I had just moved into my apartment, and in fact, he played some of the games at my apartment.
I did.
They were doing maintenance on the dirt in here that made up his internet. So Tim would come over and play, and so I would actually sometimes watch the Provokers on the TV, and on the other side of the wall in the bedroom with the door closed, he'd be playing. So it was very interesting. The idea that I got to sit after seeing that, and like I said, kind of being like, oh my gosh, people, this is how they do it. I got invited along with Tim, and I got Cassie, my fiance, to play, and it was with Barker and with Matt, and we played in a game called The Winds of Cerceline, and just the epicness of getting to, it was like pinnacle D&D, where it's all like people that I'm becoming more familiar with, but that I have had pretty good interactions with. I get to play with my fiance, who that's not something we've ever done together before. I got to play with Tim, meeting all these people. So it was just so epic it was like, I've had great games and stuff since then, but that was very much like, man, let's set this bar about as high as we can and go from there. So for me, that was pretty epic, is getting to play with people that I'm very close with, and people that have ended up becoming some of my best friends.
Yeah. Barker actually made a comment real quick. I was just going to say, if you're on the Facebook event, I hadn't changed the link. It said link to come. I just changed it. So now you can actually go to the event, and there's a link in there. So good call, Barker. Drop that ball. Jeff, are you ready yet to talk about your epic character moment?
So yeah, I don't know if there's too many to say like my favorite, a singular epic moment, but I guess one that recently happened that came to mind is Lloyd, friend of the channel, Lloyd, Jarl DM, runs a Game of Thrones game that I play in. So set in Westeros, in the Game of Thrones world. And it was just like such a disaster of like the dice and story and characters like coming to like a cataclysmic event of like failure, in a good way, like in a fun way, where it's like if you're playing a game in Westeros, like masochism kind of has to be part of the deal, where like you're gonna have a terrible time, and that's kind of part of the fun, is to see how disastrous everything can be. And we basically ended up in a situation where Lloyd runs a bunch of games with like crit charts. So if you get a critical hit, you take some really nasty, horrifying wound to your character. So my character, who's a knight in that game, was in a joust, and the enemy that I was riding against rolled a crit on me, and basically caused internal bleeding to my character, which is like, without magical healing, which there isn't in Westeros, is pretty close to a death sentence. Like, it's very difficult to heal internal bleeding with like medieval level medicine. So I start basically dying on the inside without realizing it. And then one of the other characters, thinking that he had cursed me with some previous action that he had taken, basically saw that I was dying, thought it was his fault. So he rushes over to this like magic man who's just been doing like street magic parlor tricks basically at this festival that this joust is happening at, and like begs him to save my life with his sorcery. And the guy's like, I'm just a street guy. Like, I'm just doing this. And the other character's like, I don't care. Just do something. So he does this like crazy spooky magic ritual to save my life, basically, which ends up actually working. This guy ended up basically being like a red priest. So he does some crazy ritual to basically bring my character back from the dead without anybody knowing it. Like, nobody else in the party in character is aware that this is happening, basically. So I just like wake up in the Maester's tower covered in my own blood from him trying to save me, miraculously alive out of nowhere, which causes all these other complications. So then, like, because it's like magic in Westeros, there's always a price. So of course there was going to be some terrible moment where the other shoe was going to drop and something awful was going to happen because of this, to save one life, you have to give up another. And it's a little too dark to get into willy-nilly, so I won't go into the gory details of it. But that consequence ended up happening, as well as I went back to the joust and got a crit on another person who I then mortally wounded, and that person was then now dying also. After all this had happened,
Jeff, pay it forward.
So it was like there was like a famous lord who was like more powerful than us, who had basically come to visit our festival, who was mortally wounded, trying to get healed while this other even darker cataclysm was happening. And then I mortally wound another person while that other guy is dying. After I've been, it was just like literally just chaos of carnage and disaster that just all erupted, like mostly from dice rolls and from cool role playing. So it's just like the way it kind of all stacked up into like what was supposed to be like the fun, lighthearted break moment in like the war campaign of like, it'll just be a nice, fun festival. And like the perfect Westeros twist, the celebration ended up causing like far more pain and far more chaos than anything else that had happened in the game so far. Super beautiful in a way that was very painful.
That's awesome. I'm gonna take it back and say that I feel like that feels like I've read some of the short stories that George R.R. Martin has done that he set in Westeros, prior, and that feels like a very kind of like prior to Game of Thrones, like in one of the Hedge Knight books or in one of the so that actually feels very, very Westerosi, which is really cool. For me, I'm going to take it back, and I'm going to avoid spoilers, so I'm not going to do some of the more popular ones that I would normally use. But this is kind of a cool one. One of my favorite things to do, I love telling stories, and one of my favorite things to do in a story is a good little reveal. And even as a player, I like to do reveals as my character, and I think that it's a balancing act, because you don't want to be like, as we jokingly call it, or as we say snowflakey, where it's like, oh, come on, what? So one of the things that I try to do is something that's like a little surprising, twist the trope a bit. So I played this character in a campaign on the Ignite Inspire the Story channel called The Winds of Sursaline. James, similar reference. Different session, though. So for me, I played this bard who had a lute on his back. And what I did was, I think it was the whole first session. And I knew I was going to do this. I'm like, I'm waiting for the moment. And I kept saying like, oh, it's almost time for a song. And then I'd be like, oh, it's not. It's not time for a song. I'm like, oh, is it time for a song? And I kept like, Chekhov's lute. And so eventually we got to a point where there was actually like violence. There was like bloodshed or whatever. And I said, oh, now it's time for a proper song. And I grabbed the lute. And so you have the regular tuning pegs and the headstock and the fretboard or whatever. And when I pull it out, it's this huge sword that actually comes out of the lute. So it has this lute handle on it. And that was like the big reveal. And I thought that was kind of a cool, epic character moment, especially too, because we wrote it into the story that the character, when he smells blood, gets blood frenzy, like this sort of bloodlust himself. And so I had been playing this sort of sheepish, like, impersonation of Martin Freeman from the Hobbit movies. And so I was like, oh, right then, all this. And then all of a sudden there's bloodshed. And then this bard goes to pull out a lute and it's actually this sword. And I like have these red eyes and it goes crazy. So I thought that was kind of a cool, epic character moment, because I think it was surprising to everyone, including the players, which was kind of like, whoa, who's this guy? But it wasn't so big that it was like, I'm Prince of Eternia, So, anyway, so I think that'll be mine. What do we got next? What's next on the hopper? Let me see. While you're finding one, I'm just gonna say hey to everybody real quick. DBJ is here from RPG with DBJ, the dreaded DM. We have Becoming Jason. What's going on? And of course, Sugar Fox and Ignite, Inspire the Story, is actually in the chat. Boom.
You say wait till I find one as if I'm not just like staring at a list that I can just read in order.
So you don't have
any.
You
don't actually need to stop for time. Yeah,
no.
I do.
I'm kidding.
No, I know. So next one, we have some questions from Nicholas. 2 questions. The first one is, when did you decide to really go deep into the whole RPG creation thing? So kind of when did you get into creating for RPGs rather than just sort of playing and consuming?
And I think specifically, I don't know this for sure, but it seemed like they were specifically focusing on how did you decide to really go for it? You know what I mean? Not necessarily even just when, but like what made you go, nope, that's what I want to do.
Oh, I thought you were going to actually dovetail into an answer there.
So for me, it was kind of like accidental. Like I just kind of more just like happened to me rather than something that I ever like really consciously decided. Of just like, kind of being involved in the AbTab community of a lot of people kind of always having projects and making little things. And it was just kind of the case that somebody else that I knew in the community was working on something. And I kind of was becoming friends with them through playing. And then it was just like, hey, I'm making this thing. Do you want to take a look? And I was like, yeah, I'd be happy to. Let's check it out. And then just kind of basically accidentally ended up like helping them with that basically as they made it for a while. And then just kind of like, oh yeah, this was fun. And then, between that and just kind of interacting in the community is when I kind of started going into stuff like with DMG, with AbTab and all that kind of stuff. So I mostly just kind of stumbled into making stuff for RPGs accidentally. And the more that I kept doing it, the more that I just realized that I really enjoyed it and kind of felt like I had a good knack for certain parts of it. And just kind of fell backwards into it. It was never really something that I was like, oh yeah, I want to make stuff for RPGs. That's going to be my thing. It was just like the people that I was around in the community kept doing it. And then I would just kind of become involved in those things. And the next thing I know, I'm, writing my own stuff and helping other people write stuff. And, so yeah, it was very anticlimactic sort of story to it. But yeah, it was more of just something that just kind of happened because the people that I was around did it and it was fun rather than something that I ever like really set out to like genuinely pursue as like my own course.
Yeah, it was very much the same for me where it wasn't necessarily something that was a goal directly like, oh, I can't wait to do this. But it was very much like, oh, yeah, that seems like something I could do. Yeah, very much the same way where it's like at some point you do it a little bit and then eventually you're like, oh, we're doing this a lot more. And then it's, oh, you have a company, I guess. That's the next thing you do. And, it's like, it was never like, a man, my goal is to do this. Certainly not for me. So, yeah, very much the same where it kind of just happened slowly.
So for me, I've been creating in some form or another for as long as I can remember, especially like, well, at least since like teenage years, some sort of like, okay, we're going to do a comic book or I want to make a video game. Like I used to make, full sheet drawings of like a Sonic the Hedgehog style game where it was like a different kind of character. And like, I had this whole level that I would like do the screens of, and it would be, 10 pages. And it was this like haunted, like New Orleans riverboat sort of level. And I had the whole thing drawn out and I had the bad guys. And then that led into like, I realized that I could, on thick construction paper, I had watercolors. And so I would draw, so like gadgets and guns and bad guys, and I would cut them out. And then I would have these like play sets of my own. And so like that kind of stuff, like making comic books by drawing the panels and like trying to fill them in and whatever. So even as far back as like elementary school, I was getting into trouble for drawing superheroes all the time. And we went and saw at the, we went to the planetarium and my teacher was finally like, oh, well, finally you're going to be able to draw something having to do with science. And so I drew this like this Roman with this huge sword and this crazy helmet. She's like, what's this? I'm like, well, it's Mars, the god of war. And so I say all that to say that I had kind of been doing that without stopping for years and years and years. And then when the D&D Beyond playtest came out, it sort of rolled into that. And so I started like making stuff for the Paladin before the rules were even finished. I was like writing my own stuff and writing roll tables and all that stuff. So there was this kind of merging, because for a while there, James and I were trying to get something creative off the ground. Something, anything. You know, we tried blogs and we tried just all kinds of different stuff. And yeah, I'll be very quick about this part of the story, but basically when my daughter was born, it was like the day of or the day before D&D's 5th edition starter set came out. And so while my wife was at the hospital, I went and got, like, she was done, the baby was born, everything was good, my wife was sleeping, and I was like, cool. So it was like my first actual break away from the hospital, and I drove to a little gaming store and I picked up the rules at that moment. And that's where I started kind of like reading, and the rest was sort of history. But I knew I wanted to get into it when I realized that I had developed as a storyteller. I had developed as someone who kind of knew the kind of stories they wanted to tell. And then I think that the thing that locked it in was I realized that with an RPG, all you have to do is write the idea. You don't have to finish writing the story. And I thought, are you kidding? There's a way to just come up with the awesome idea, the pitch, write like the bits that normally would then make me smash my face into the wall because I couldn't finish it, and then hand it to other people and they'll finish it for me live. That's when I decided, I'm like, yeah, this RPG gig is pretty sweet. So James and I started Tabletop Terrors and published a book about tieflings, and the rest is history.
Yeah, so kind of going into part 2 of the question, because it's very much related to a lot of that, is again from Nicholas. How would you define your relationship with this RPG creation side of your life? Is it something you would love to be doing full time? So for me, I guess that's always been kind of a weird, complicated subject in the sense of like, I would love to be doing more with basically anything creative, whether that's RPGs or whether that's another aspect of my life. You know, creativity is very much like Tim, just something that's kind of like in me automatically. That's kind of my default mode, is to go into that sort of stuff. So right now, I guess I'm kind of in a bit of a ramp up with that. Of like, I don't know if it'll ever be something that's exclusively my life. And even if I did make RPGs my job, so to speak, there would always be other creative stuff that I would also want to do. Like, that would never be my only thing that I did. But yeah, I totally would be open if the chips fall in the right way to move into that space, you know, as things go. Like, I have ideas for my own projects that I'll be ramping up after Dead Man's Guide that I want to make happen. I'll continue to help other people with their projects. And if it gets to a point where that can be something that I do, then that would be awesome. But it's also not necessarily something that's so deeply ingrained in my life path idea that I couldn't imagine a life outside of working on RPGs. Like, there's a lot of other creative stuff that I would be just as happy to do, like, full time with my life. So it's just kind of feeling it out, seeing what happens for me. It'd be cool if it happened, but it's, you know, it's not the only, you know, that there's a lot of other ways that I could see life going for me that would leave RPGs as a fun side hobby, and I'd be happy with that too.
Yeah, I find myself in a very interesting circumstance, in the sense that I love filling the RPG creation niche that I fill, like at Absolute Tabletop, at Tabletop Terrors, because there are some parts of it that are pretty integral that I'm not as good at, or I don't find as much joy in. But there are a lot of other things that are sort of supplemental to it that I really like. So more than anything, I like being a part of something that is so community focused, and I wouldn't want to give that up. I wouldn't want to give up, you know, a bunch of people that are very like community driven and very nice and not too insular, and, you know, sharing ideas, things like that, where for me on RPGs solves that. And that's more what I'd be looking for if I couldn't work on RPGs. I wouldn't necessarily go, oh, well, that sucks. It would more be like, okay, well, what else can I do that's like this? What other hobby can I be a part of to some degree that I can still get those things that I want out of it and get to do something like play RPGs? So I guess that's kind of where I am with it.
Yeah, I mean, specifically to the question, like, how would I define the relationship with the RPG creation side of my life? I found a way to make it healthy. There are a lot of ideas that are in my mind, and so I've learned that they can only come out one at a time. And if you admit that to yourself and not worry about the awesome thing that someone else made, that you might have had a dusting of an idea that was similar to it, because that's real, and you have to look at other people's work. And in my opinion, I've learned to just enjoy it and be like, oh my God, I'm so glad this thing exists, and not be sad like, oh man, I had sort of an idea like this. And it's like, yeah, but come on, like, be serious. It's not like we were at in a race to the studio and this person got to the studio first and did their pitch. This thing's probably been an idea for them for 5 years longer than it was for me, and they're in a place to make it into a TV show or a book. But learning that my ideas can come out one at a time, learning that there's only one me, and that has a lot of ramifications. One being that it doesn't matter if it's a similar idea. There's no one on the planet that can make something exactly like me, and understanding my value. And I want to say that to anyone out there who's a creator. That's your value. Your value is that I've never met anyone just like you, and no one else has. And so I've learned that in the same way that a chef can be handed the same ingredients, but the dish will always be different because the chef's hand and their knife work and the marks that they leave on the thing is the beauty of it. And so learning that I can only do one of those at a time, making sure not to do a too large of one so that I can actually finish it, and that learning that, what I make is only what I can make. And that when you can combine it with other people and their talents, it then furthers that. And it's like, so when I'm writing a book with James and Barker and Matt and Jeff, those elements, and Lloyd, those elements make it something that no one else could replicate. And so just bearing that in mind. Is it something I'd love to be doing full time? Absolutely. That's it. Absolutely. Yes.
Pretty simple. Yeah.
Yep.
So I'll end that there.
Alrighty. So yeah, that's Nicholas's questions there. So we actually do have a question from Barker as well. What was your first RPG character, and what's a favorite memory of them? And also, as the secondary question directed at Tim, what do you have against the Oxford comma?
You can have my Oxford comma when you pry it from my cold, comma, dead, comma, and lifeless hands.
I'm assuming you must have forgotten one in your post.
Yeah.
That gotta be, yeah, because I absolutely, you know what I have against the Oxford comma? Slapdash planning. We were recording.
It shows up in editing.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, seriously. So I'm definitely, I've been indoctrinated. I don't want to eat grandpa. It's like, let's eat grandpa. No, let's eat grandpa. I think that I'm a big fan, but I made that event while we were filming another video. So please forgive me, and I'll throw it to you guys for a real answer.
So a bit embarrassing, but I don't remember my first character. I remember that it was a human and that it was a paladin. And that's all I remember. I don't have any favorite memory, or I don't even remember their name or their deal or their story. That's all. Yeah, that's literally all I have. That relates back to my first character. So yeah, shameful. I know that I don't have that recorded for posterity.
For me, the first character I ever had was one that I made sneakily in Tim's bedroom. I was definitely not supposed to be in there, but he was gone and he had the D&D books. At this point, this was pre-Kairisma Mysterious, but right around that same time. That was one of my first, but the first character I ever actually made, via, using the rules, was I got a yellow legal pad. And I was sitting in my brother's room because my mother had been told that we shouldn't be playing D&D, and it's a whole thing. And, everybody kind of knows that. We were one of those families. And so I wasn't supposed to be, but I knew even at that age, that absolutely, I'm like, no, this is just a game and I want to play it. And I saw Tim playing it and I got to see it. I was like so intrigued. So I remember I didn't have a character sheet. We didn't have a printer or anything. So I just like wrote all the stuff on a legal pad and did it. And I remembered like looking at it after all the numbers were on there and stuff. This was probably D&D 3rd edition.
Yeah, it was.
Which I never actually played, but that was the character I made. And I remembered thinking, all right, now all I have to do is find people to play with. And I'm there. Like, to me, this was a big step to be able to play. Like, and that the next part was like, no, listen, after this, just finding a whole group of people at, like I said, age 12, 13, well, that's going to be a breeze. So my favorite memory, I guess, is creating that character because I never actually got to play with it.
That's amazing. I think so. First, I just want to tell you what kind of look at my hand sanitizer game. It's actually called Good at Naps with 2 blinky eyelashes. So shout out.
So that's Tim.
That's me. That's my hand sanitizer game. My first character was Damon EF, which if you take the first initial as D and the last name is EF, I spell death. Oh, Lord of Edgelords. Damon EF was for a campaign we never finished, but it was the first one that I made. And I've told this story before, I won't now. I was sneaking away to a friend's house who would then drive me, 300 feet across the street to another friend's house that I wasn't allowed to because it was across this major intersection. So that was the character that I made it for. Didn't ever get to play him, but Damon EF. Death. Ooh, that was my first character. So he's good at naps.
That's somehow like extremely appropriate for a Tim first character. Like there's nothing about that's surprising to me.
Right? Yeah.
In a good way, but yeah.
Awesome.
So we have a question here from Matthew, which is, how do you guys feel about people who no-show to your table? Recently had a GM get furious at a no-show and was going to kick somebody out immediately with basically not even a chance to discuss because of a time zone complication. Eventually they calmed down a little bit, but we're still mad. How would you guys handle it? Context matters here, I think, a lot. Why did they no-show? Was it because they just didn't feel like it? Time zone difference makes me think, like, because I've had time zone problems because we play with a lot of people from around all over the place, where it's just like, daylight savings time happens in one part of the world and not another, and they think the game's at 7, but it's actually supposed to be at 6, and they just haven't even woken up in the morning yet because they're in Australia and I'm here, so it's the morning for it's just like, in that case, just like, oh yeah, oops, that sucks. Like, who cares? Like, it doesn't matter, if it's that sort of thing. If they just blew it off for no reason and I don't know them, then yeah, I probably don't invite them back to the game. But if it's somebody I know, and especially if there's a reason, like, hey, sorry, I couldn't tell you before, but I was in a car accident. I had to get that taken. Like, I'm okay, but I missed the game. Sorry. That's a very different story to just like, I just didn't feel like telling anybody and didn't feel like showing up for no reason, So how I would handle it, is very much dependent on what happened and why and how well I know the person. But yeah, I think not giving them at all a chance to justify, I think is pretty ruthless. Don't think I'd ever go that far. At least hear them out on a reason, because it's very likely that, especially if they're excited to keep playing the game and they're genuinely apologetic, like, I'll basically look the other way almost any time for something like that.
This is the way.
Yeah, I think in general, like you said, a lot of it matters. In general, focusing on the way the GM handled it, the idea that if this isn't a person that has had problems in before, it seems a little unfair that they wouldn't at least talk to them. Like you said, Jeff, there are plenty of situations that would be fine and some that would not be. But I think overall, the biggest mistake is not talking to somebody about it. That's not to say that the GM is completely wrong. Maybe they've just had a lot of problems with this person or other people. Overall, the best thing you can do, we actually just filmed a video on this, is talk to people about stuff. So outside of the rest of the situation, having a conversation about it is what I would do, and I think would be the biggest mistake of something like that. But outside of that, it's like you said, there's so much context and stuff, but that's the big thing, is I would just try and get to the root of the problem and make sure that it's still a group that works for everybody.
I feel like, too, it's easy to overreact in the moment. It's not cool if anybody no-shows you, but I think it's important that, and Jeff, you talked about this communication. It's not something you're going to deal with right now. If someone, I was a manager for a lot of years, and if someone no-shows you, you try to get a hold of them, and if you can't, you can get as mad as you want, but all the work needs to get done. So you can focus on being mad, or you could say, hey, well, all right, cool. Tried. We'll deal with that when it's time to deal with it. And then I just go on. If they're a pivotal part of the story, look, I would just change it. I mean, like, just go on as best as you can. It's difficult when you're very upset, and it's disrespectful. And I think also too, like, it can be easy for me to feel like it was some sort of incompetence on my part, or like I feel self-doubt. Like, why wouldn't they show up to my game? Is it my game? Is it because and then I'm rattled and I'm mad, quote unquote, but I'm really probably just maybe feeling like a little shaken that maybe I'm not as confident as I thought I was, and maybe the game isn't good, and all those game master things that I think, but now amplified because someone no-showed me. So I would probably give it, 5-10 minutes, something fairly reasonable, maybe 15 at a max. And then I would just say, hey, everybody, I think we're going to go ahead and move forward without, so-and-so. For now, let's see if they show up. I messaged them. I'm not hearing anything. But yeah, boom. And then I would do my best to pretend like it didn't bother me at all for the players. And go on like it was what was planned and it was perfect. And then I would deal with it outside of the game, probably the next day. In fact, if that person messaged me that day, I would probably purposefully not respond until the next day so that I could sleep on it and gather my thoughts and not be emotional in my response.
Yeah, I think that part's really important too, of like that time and that moment is probably not the best time to find a solution. Like, you can feel those feelings, you can feel mad, you can feel upset, you can question, whatever. And that's all totally okay and valid to do. But that's not the time to then say, like, I'm going to solve this problem right now. This person's gone. Like, that at the very least, give it some time to let your own emotions settle. And, almost every time that I've ever had somebody not show up and not message, there's almost always, like, within a couple hours, some sort of explanation of like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I thought the game was at this time, but it was actually at this time. There's so many reasons why it could happen. So not jumping to conclusions too quickly, and not trying to settle things too quickly, I think is very important.
Yeah.
Alrighty, next question. This one is from Josh Holes in the chat, which is, I saw the video that we did on world building. Very cool that you watched that. For him, he says the hardest part isn't necessarily getting the ball rolling on the world, but what kind of advice do you have for opening the quest or mission of the game? So rather than kind of building the setting, how do you actually get people started playing in the world?
For me, I shamelessly look at a cool situation that happened in any other media and like kind of nab that, where even just a concept where, like, one of my favorites is just about any time I see it, a chase with like horse-drawn carriages is so cool. Where I'm like, that sort of thing where I just find and I go, okay, so we know the world is this and this. Like you said, you've got your pillars and stuff, but okay, how do we zoom in now? I'm like, all right, you guys are in a stagecoach and somebody tries to rob you and the bridge is out ahead. Like, I'm just seasoning the crap out of this and I go, okay, what do you guys do? For me, that's getting the ball rolling, where I'm like, I just take a scene from something, or even, especially we've written stuff for RPGs, or we have a lot of RPG related material. There are a lot of like roll tables out there for that very thing, mission starters. And I'll go and I'll just look at them and pick and roll and just kind of, I do really well with that little seed. Even if the eventual idea I land on is not even close, I like that little spark. So like I said, I just look to anything else for inspiration of like, oh, those people are doing something cool. I want my players to feel that. We'll do that,
What about you, Jeff?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different for me because a lot of the games that I play in or run, like, kind of already have sort of the goal of what the game is trying to like explore kind of set ahead of time, which makes it a lot easier than to sort of jump in. So for example, like, rather than just saying like, okay, we all have our characters, we'll just start somewhere and see what happens, it's like, we're playing as this noble house with this player who's being the person in charge of it. with the intent of doing this, and we've already decided all that before the game has started. So running the game is very easy to just say, like, we all already know what's happening. What do you do with that? So it's kind of like it sort of builds the starter in. So I guess that might be my advice then, is just like, before you actually start session one, sort of decide, like, what is this game trying to be about? What is the party going to try to do? Is this build an army and destroy the evil Dark Lord? Is this, a noble house trying to gain power? Kind of what's the theme and what's the goal of the game? And if you can kind of figure that out and sort of build the party and the beginning to sort of suit that, it's super easy to just immediately jump into game and start going, rather than have that moment of like, okay, well, how do I bring everybody together? How do I give them a quest that they'll actually do? How do I get them to agree? You just sort of build all that in beforehand into character creation and into the sort of the game detailing. And then it's a lot easier then to just start moving in the direction that things have already been prepared to move into.
Yeah, we actually did a video that I'm really excited about. It's a session 0 video where we go through session 0. The short form is basically explaining why it's important. The long form is us doing a real session 0 with examples. And then we actually did a third video. It's just the questions, and you can play it with your group so that they can actually go along. One of the things, and I'll just narrow it down to this because you don't have that video yet. For me, the thing that I found makes the smoothest story is deciding the characters' connections to each other. That is probably the most important thing. By doing that, it gives me an opportunity to know where to put pressure. And so if I know that these two people know each other because their parents used to serve in the war together, I can make an enemy of that war appear and a story happens. So I think it's important to establish some sort of character connections. And I would not necessarily say that I require them, but I would strongly encourage that at least 2 people in the group have a connection with each other. And that makes it at least easy to focus on them. Because the other thing is, if you put someone in danger, the group tends to follow. So if you just put something normal happening, it's hard to kind of hook into that, where it's like you're in a scene and it's just a town. If you say this villain from the war, now you have 2 people immediately interested because their parents served in the war. Whether they're interested because they didn't agree with the war or they're interested because they did, they at least have a connection. And then have that person, performing injustices, injustice for alls. No, you have that person performing injustices in the town square, basically beating people up or, war propaganda about how, or being just generally a jerk. And characters tend to step up to that. So put a bad person doing mean things to innocent people that's some way connected to one of the characters, and you're off to the races. Ooh. I think it's time for lip moisturizer, boys.
Alrighty, moving right along. We still got a couple more here, but we're making decent time for once on some of these.
I'll correct
next
that.
question from make the next story a real long one, just a real. I want the full history, the full context of everything leading up. Just really, really make it an event.
If you could about halfway through forget what the point is, but keep going, soldier on until you get there.
Yeah,
absolutely. Be careful of my giant shiny lips now too. It's like ping, 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 ping. Sorry, listen, they hurt. I've been sick. They're split open.
It's the special effects from the original Wonder Woman TV series.
Don't try to shoot my mouth, please.
Alrighty, so next question here is from NPC number 746862. Any advice on how to engage players at the table? A guy at his table basically never bites on anything. It's mostly just a shoulder shrug and meh, whether it's PC friendship or conflict. I mean, my answer is perhaps direct for some people. I'd say like, hey, are you having fun? It doesn't seem like you're having fun. Why are you playing the game? Not like that. I'd ask it more.
Why are you here?
But genuinely, like, hey, I just wanted to check in. Like, we keep putting all these things out. you don't really seem to be interested. Like, are you actually interested in the game? Are you having fun? Because sometimes it is just a perception thing of like, you think that they hate everything and they think they're having a great time and that you obviously must know that. And then you just don't connect on that, which might just be a perception thing of like, are you having fun? Is this enjoyable for you? And they might say, yeah, I'm having a blast. And then it's like, okay, well, carry on, I guess. Or it could just be an instance that, you know, they're not having fun, but they don't know how to tell you that they don't want to play. And just having that conversation might be, you know, the way to go. Or it could just be a matter of like asking them, it doesn't really seem like you're engaging in what I'm giving you. What could I put in the game that would make you connect and get excited about what's happening, you know? And kind of giving them the chance to say like, I was really hoping for, you know, a scene where my character could do this. And we keep getting all these things that are about political intrigue. And I made this like assassin character. So like, but I'm not getting to kill anybody. And that's kind of what I made my guy to do. So you're trying to do all this talk stuff and I want to kill, you know? So it's just like, okay, give him someone to kill, you know? So it could just be as simple as asking very directly, like, what would you like to see that would make you excited? What would get you engaged in the game? And then give that to them to do, you know? Sometimes the easiest way is just to ask what they want and then give them that thing, or at least give them the out to talk about it. You know, if they're not digging what's going on, then find a way to either give them something that excite them, or at least just have the conversation of like, maybe this isn't for you, and that's okay. And you don't have to like be here out of obligation because you said you'd play and now you're not having any fun. You know, just again, I'll default to my usual answer of just like have a normal conversation about it.
Yeah, and just like, you know, previous questions, I think the context is very important. I've certainly been in situations where somebody wants to bring, say, their girlfriend or their other friend that doesn't really do this, but they want to be a part of it. And that person is just, they're not interested in doing this. They've, whether through peer pressure from their friend or because that's what everybody was doing and that's what we're hanging out. I've definitely been in situations where there have been people at the table that simply weren't interested in playing. And I don't think that's a good idea. You know what I mean? It's going to potentially derail. So first for me is, well, make sure that they're interested in playing. And if not, I think the rest of it comes down to setting expectations. Even in that case, make sure everybody's on the same page that, hey, maybe we'll do this week, but next week we'll, you know, do something else. We'll play a lighter game or we'll watch a movie or, you know, we'll do the thing you like too, so that everybody gets a chance. But then, yeah, like you said, Jeff, really having an adult conversation with somebody and really just trying to solve the problem if there is one. I have definitely also had players like that where I'm just like, hey, I just wanted to, you know, touch base, make sure you're having a good time. You don't really do or say much. And I try to give you some options. You know, I try to work on your character and they're like, no, I'm having a great time. I'm just kind of, you know, feeling it out and watching and I get to do stuff in combat. And I'm okay. Like you said, it was just my perception that person was kind of not engaging, but that's just kind of how they liked to play, you know? And I'm like, well, there's always that too. So I think just an honest conversation is usually the prescription.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just echo these guys, but I'm gonna say it in a way that I think that I would say it to the player, which is, you know, one of the things I always try to do with people is ask them questions, and I do that to try to understand their perspective. I think a lot of times miscommunications can grow because we have predisposed notions of what we feel anchored in before we actually have any sort of evidence of that. So, hey, are you having fun in the game? I'm just checking in with all the players, and do that. Check in with all the players. Don't just check in, because the opposite is very true as well. A person that appears as though they're having a great time can be dying inside. And so don't go by appearances. Don't go by people's facial expressions, always. And so just check in with your players periodically, maybe every few sessions or so. And when this comes up, use it as an opportunity to check in with everyone. Say something like, hey, how's it going? You know, I'm checking in with everybody, just seeing, like, hey, how are you finding the campaign so far? You know, in terms of fun, are you having fun so far? If they say, yeah, I mean, it's pretty good, it's not good, because they would either say yes or so say, okay, cool. Well, this could just be my perception, so forgive me if this isn't right, but it seems like some of the challenges that I've been kind of putting your way, you've been indifferent toward. You've been indifferent toward those challenges. I wouldn't say you shrugged and you know, just say, you know, you kind of seem like it wasn't anything. What's a challenge that you wouldn't be indifferent towards? What's something that would really, to kind of like say what Jeff's saying, like what's something that you're, that would excite you? What's something that would excite you to play? And let them just tell you. And, whatever they tell you, you got to kind of be okay with it. Like, it could be so far off from what you're currently doing. But that's also why, and we've talked about this, we got to get that session 0 video up, because it is the number one preventative, measure for a lot of the problems that come without it. So, but that was it. Hey, just checking in with everybody, just making sure you're having fun. Are you having fun? What can we do to make it more fun for you? And those simple questions, and then write down everyone's answers, by the way, because you'll think, oh, I'll remember that. Yep, I've got it here in the old noodle. And then it's another 30 days before you play, and you're like, oh, God. Now it's actually sort of busted if you ask again. Hey, I know this game's important to me, but can you just run me through again the breakthrough you had when you finally shared your feelings about the campaign? So, yeah.
I just wanted to highlight real quick something that Barker put in the chat that I think is important enough that I want to say it on the video too, which is like, when people tell you what that answer is, actually, take that answer to heart. Like, it's one thing to ask how they feel about the campaign. It's another thing to actually take that information and use it. And it could be it could be a big way to hurt things more if you ask them how you can make it better, and then you don't make it better at all, because then it can make them feel ignored, as well as, not getting what they want out of the game. So yeah, I thought Barker's comment, be okay with the answer. If they're not having fun, take it seriously and be open to changing it. That's important too. So thank you, Barker, for that, because it's spot on.
And do not disagree with them then. Don't say, what? No, that's not the campaign. We have fun. We do have combats. We do all the time. Don't argue or try to convince them. So that's also part of like what Barker's saying in terms of don't be defensive either. Because if you look at your own stuff, it might not
agree with their points.
Right.
Yeah, you might not agree with their points, but their feelings are still their actual feelings. And if you say, like, if they say, it would be more fun if there was more combat, and you say, well, no, because combat, but you can't do the role play. But then you can't have the role playing moments if all you do is fight all. And it's just like, that's a surefire way to make sure they never open up to you again.
Yep.
If you finally get them to say it and then you shut it down, that's a game over. Yeah. Alrighty. I think that's pretty good on that one. So we have a question from DPJ, which is, do you feel pressure from the loud minority versus the silent majority, meaning very vocal people that want something that the majority don't want but say little, when it comes to like writing and design? So do you design for the vocal critics, or do you design for the bigger people who you might not hear from but think that they want?
So I'm personally very statistically focused, and this comes up at work a lot, like where my day job. So it's helped in cases like this, where especially where like as Absolute Tabletop or Tabletop Terrors, we've released a product or a video, and a few people say the same thing, but say 100 people received the product or watched the video, and 5 of them said, "Oh, I don't agree with this one point." Obviously that idea of the vocal minority, it's very simple to go, oh, well, nobody really liked that point. That's what humans do. So what I do, and there's actually a name for the type of diagram and stuff, but it's an extremely simple concept. You graph that visually. You go, okay, well, there are 300 people watched this video, and we got 5 comments saying the same thing. 1 person saying it and 4 people agreeing. Okay. Well, if you consider that statistically, you're like, well, that is a minority. And like you said, it's the vocal minority, but specifically the thing that I have trouble with sometimes is considering what that looks like. So when like you come up, you go, okay, this is how I think this rule should be written. And you have those few people that, it keeps coming up. Oh, I don't like this. I don't like this one. I don't like this magic system. And you go, oh man, I should change the magic system. You're like, well, hold on. Nobody is saying I love the magic system, but not because it's not great, but because it's just a part of the whole. Whereas specifically people don't like, So for me personally, I try to make sure that if I make changes based on feedback, that I don't weight it too heavily statistically, where if 1 person said it or 5 out of a certain amount said it, but if 5 out of 6 people that I show my concept to say, no, I think that's not going to work, I go, okay, I need to I need to personally weight that more heavily. But basically, as humans, we're kind of not very good at doing that without seeing it or without really looking at those numbers. So that's usually what I try to do, is make sure that whether, whoever is vocal or not, that I act on the right bits of feedback, basically.
What about you, Jeff?
Ooh, so this is a bit of a tricky one sometimes. For me, it kind of depends on the material. I can be someone, if it's something that either touches on something that I'm insecure about or something that I don't feel super confident about, that minority of criticism can affect me, especially in those instances. And that's just, being honest of like, yeah, sometimes I get those comments and it just hits that one thing where it's just like, I wasn't sure about it. And then somebody else says it. And then it just confirms like, oh, well, that means I definitely was wrong. I knew it. I'm so stupid for thinking that, even though I knew it was wrong, and it's so easy to get caught up in those little bits of comments. And other times, if it's something that I'm confident about, that I know that I like, it'll have the opposite reaction. It's like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. I know that this is cool. So it can very much depend for me on exactly the specifics of, how much I'm confident in what I wrote, and what they're nitpicking at. And another thing that can affect it a lot is who the criticism is from. If I get, 90 people tell me that something is good and 10 people tell me that something is and those 10 people are my close friends who can be honest with me and know that I'll take their opinion to heart and that I trust their opinion on things, that'll have a much different effect than if it's, the people that I trust are telling me that it's cool and some random guy is commenting that they don't like it. So yeah, I can definitely feel that pressure, especially if it's something that by chance happens to touch into something that I'm already touchy about. But for the most part, I'm much more likely to lean into the people's opinions that I trust and follow their advice and their, outlook rather than sort of the general outlook. And I also just generally, I like to make the things that I want to make. And if that's going to be something that's unpopular with a majority of people, that there's a part of me that's okay with that. It's just like, maybe this is a niche thing and that's okay. And it's just going to be for people who are like me and like this, and not everyone's going to like it. And that's okay too. So I know I just gave like 3 completely diametrically opposed answers, but they're all true in different instances.
Yeah, for me, I've learned for myself that it's a matter of figuring out what I want to make, and that if I, it's not easy. It's a skill, and it's something that sometimes isn't possible when you begin a project. But when I'm making a rule set, say, and we're like, hey, we're going to make a travel system, for a Dead Man's Guide to Dragon Grin, what I do is I decide what I want it to be. And this sounds super simple, but there's so many things that we go into, and without knowing what you're trying to achieve, it causes a lack of confidence. And that lack of confidence can more easily cause you to follow the wrong advice. I've learned to know what to fight for because I know what I'm trying to do. And if I don't know what I'm trying to do, I'll wait a lot of times. That's dangerous advice to people starting out. Don't do that if you're starting out. I'm saying this as someone who I can say I have professionally written tens of thousands of words. I know when I can go, all right, I got to shelf that because I don't know what I'm trying to do with this travel system yet. I have an idea, but I'm not there yet. And then, so knowing that if I show 100 people and they're like, well, this and this and this doesn't work and this and this, I'll know what I'm trying to do. And for any kind of belief, there are always unbelievers. That's okay. For every zealot, there's a pagan. You know what I mean? Like for everyone who loves Apple, there's someone who hates Apple. And you can name, the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, for every zealot, there's a Terran Marine, like just...
Right, exactly. For every schmalboo, there's a zug-zug. So, do you want Dax? The point being that if Apple knows what they're doing, if Nintendo knows what they're doing, because for every Nintendo lover, there's a PlayStation 4 lover who can't stand the sort of cartoonish, style of Nintendo. But Nintendo knows what they're doing. They know why they're putting things in a game. They know how to put it in a game to evoke what they're doing. And so I guess what I'm saying is, this is a very long answer, but I think it's really important. If you know what you're trying to do, it's easier to navigate whether or not you should listen to people. That said, it's also important to have an inner circle. People who you know you, know the kind of content you're trying to create, know your heart, know your style. For me, that's Barker and James and Jeff and Matt Click. And I can show them something and I can say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do here. And they know me well enough to be able to shoot straight with me. But I can, as Jeff said, I can take their opinions to heart. But I can also, it's my job to communicate to them what I'm trying to do with the system. So that's a very long answer, but I hope that it's helpful because it has changed the way that I create. So I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I think the one thing I want to explicitly state that you touched on is the idea that it is a practice skill, in my opinion. That you have to decide the people you do listen to, the people you don't. You have to decide, oh, am I right here? You know, it's difficult. Sometimes you make the right choice, sometimes you do the wrong one. So yes, it's a thing you practice and that I'm still practicing.
Yeah, and if I don't love it, if I don't love it, that's step one. That's like if and I will sometimes make choices where, and Jeff will be like, I don't know about that, and I'm like, no man, I'm telling you. Or Barker will be like, hey, just consider this, and I always do. But there are some things where I'm like, no, I know that no one else likes this. I know it, and I know why, and I'm consciously choosing to do it this way because I don't know why, but I love it.
Yeah, and I think your point about intent is extremely important in the sense of like, if I set out to make a rules light system and the criticism I keep getting is that there's not enough rules, changing it to follow that guy's advice is, going against the spirit. So it's just like, that's a very important benchmark too of like, what am I trying to do? Does that advice do what I'm trying to do as good or better than the way I have it? Or are they just complaining that what I'm doing is not their thing? Because those are very different situations.
So I imagine we'll be coming to the last one or two here. We got a few more than
a few more minutes. Few more minutes here. I'm good for like another hour. No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. We're not going to go another hour.
All righty. So we got just another. There's probably like 5, I think, questions.
Okay.
Maybe 6.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if we want to pick which ones we feel we have the most to say about to wrap things up or not. Are there any in the doc that are like really catching eyes?
I like this.
You're muted, James.
You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I was trying to both hold spacebar and highlight something in a doc, which doesn't work because it just deletes it because I highlight. So it was a mess. But yeah, question 3 there I thought was good. The other ones are like a little more. The ones before it are a little more specific and are less opiniony, and that one's kind of like, well, I don't know. It seems like
I'm kind of into this one. So maybe I don't know. Do you want to just rapid fire? Be less. Tim tells a story about his life and
that's fair.
Does a whole Bagger Vance of the.
If we do that, we can definitely knock all these questions out. But
okay, let's do a lightning round.
What do you do on a Bag of Vance? All right.
So keeping it snappy on these ones. Then, what are you all working on at the moment? So for me, Dead Man's Guide, Glyph, a couple other unnamed projects that are not yet ready for public awareness, secret stuff. But yeah, those are the big ones RPG wise for me is Dead Man's Guide, helping them finish that up, and then going to be working on Glyph a lot more once Dead Man's Guide is done. So those are kind of my big RPG projects at the moment. I have a couple other hazy ideas, but nothing that's ready to like say I'm working on it as much as it's just in my brain.
Lightning round, I'll say I copy Jeff's answer minus the Glyph. I'll probably work on it, but just not as much as him. Maybe. We'll see.
This is actually a funny question for me because I'm not usually the guy that's going to say these things. Yeah, I have been more in earnest than I have anytime recently been putting together finally all the notes I have for a system I'm currently calling the Quest system. Which the reason it was called that has completely changed, so it's just a working title at this point. But it is a very different style of role-playing game than we're used to, is the best thing I can say. The other one that I'm really excited about is I'm tinkering with this sort of it's a competitive roguelike racing game where I don't know. That's basically the best way to sum it up. It's a board game actually, but it's sort of a racing roguelike where there's rounds over and over, but each round ends with all the guys dying and sort of respawning, and you try to get further and stuff. So I'm really excited about that too.
All right, I think we should workshop it right now.
Like you said, another couple hours here, baby.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So, lightning round continuing. So, what games do you consume online that you watch religiously or would recommend? Preferably things that are less well known or not directly advertised on NabTab. Shameful answer. Sorry for the shame on the community. I don't watch live plays. That's just the honest answer. So I don't really have much to offer on my end.
It's funny. I'm the same way. I tend not to. I'll watch some people's sometimes when I can fit them in, but it's not something I do regularly. So certainly I couldn't even tell you ones that would be uncommon because I would only be going back to the more common ones that a lot of people know about and get advertised in AppTab.
I'm laughing because I just saw
What Marker wrote.
I feel to do on the green grass in the bag of ants. That's so. I would say I don't know. Excuse me, whether or not they're well known or not. So that, I don't know how popular they are. Definitely, Erasmus Expeditions, which is Jeremy Lilly's channel, is some of the best, consistently solid games. They're very episodic. Jeremy takes a ton of care in the story, and the characters that play are excellent. They just do a great job. Then Jarl DM has a channel, which is Lloyd Collins, and just a lot of really good, gritty, real-world play, and he has guest game masters come in, like Nico Dawson, so I highly recommend that. Those are all very good, and you can follow those as well. They seem very much like just like episodes of a TV show. And then Mini Terrain Domain. So Jake Norman has a ton of content. Alan Holloway of Check for Traps is running games on his channel, I think Friday nights. So those are the three. If you're looking for hey, I want something to watch this coming week, I want to binge it, Erasmus Expeditions, Jarl DM, and Mini Terrain Domain are all just really hit, no miss, in my opinion. So that's what I want. I have a really long commute. I have a lot of time where I can just be listening to stuff while I'm working. So that's kind of my go-to stuff.
Cool. All right. Sources of inspiration that are not directly related to RPGs, fantasy, or science fiction. If your answer is history, could you specify more specifically? For me, I like a lot of weird spiritual stuff. So alchemy or witchcraft, mysticism, those sorts of weird esoteric mystical traditions are a big source of inspiration for me. Lots of video games and media, but that kind of falls into fantasy and sci-fi. Also, just a lot of general art stuff. So there's a lot, I think, from music that I take a lot from, sort of more abstractly. I'm very much of the opinion that basically all disciplines are in some way interconnected. So there's at least some idea, something that you can grab from anything, basically. And the things that I'm most interested in are art, music, creative stuff. So I take a lot of ideas from that sort of abstractly and translate them into RPG world building and game running and stuff like that.
Oh, hey, what up, Lloyd? Lloyd's here. I didn't know that. You got name plugged, boy. Those are good answers, Jeff. What about you, Jimbo?
So for me, it's funny because I didn't take it in the way that Jeff did, and I think that's more what they meant. So I kind of had to pivot a little bit on my answer. But it made me think that for me, music can be incredibly moving, especially songs that tell some sort of story, because it's like a short story, but even shorter. They had to be very specific about what they put and stuff. And so there are certain songs, usually with lyrics, like I said, that tell some sort of story that move me incredibly. And that can be some of the most inspiring stuff. Because I go, okay, how can I make players feel what I feel because of this song? Kind of very roughly going, okay, well, I want that. This is a song about horse soldiers throughout the ages. So how can I bring these concepts of, what we once had is going away because tanks are here now. but then, in different parts of the world, horses are more commonly used again. And I'm like, well, in the space of like a 5-minute song, I got to feel all that. So how do I take that and turn it into something that I can express to the players? And then especially afterward go, oh, and this is the song that was the inspiration for that. And I really like that sort of cycle, that feeling.
Sure. Yeah. For me, I'm going to go a little bit of a different route here. It's a sensory experience to go into a comic store. I highly recommend it. I think that a comic/game shop, and they're dying, and so I try to support the local one here as much as I can. I try every couple weekends or something. I take my daughter and we buy some comics, but there are so many different kinds of comic, trade paperback, like graphic novel. There's so many different kinds that just walking through a comic shop, even if you just find the shelf for what are called trade paperbacks, where it's like you'll see decades of comic history just laid out in front of you, different covers. There are all kinds of indie books out that are just phenomenal and just doing amazing things. And most comic shop owners, if you're respectful, don't mind if you sort of peruse for a while. It's polite to buy something, drop $5 and support a local store. But that is just that, or these are way harder to find, but if you can find one, it's just amazing, which is a Warhammer store. There's one about, what would you say, James, like 25 minutes away from us?
It's about 40, which is why I don't go there more.
So
just on the cusp of too far.
But they have in the center there's terrain, and there are all the new sets around, and just seeing these fully painted minis and all the boxes and the art and all that stuff, it just puts you in a different world and like a different mindset. There's also something to be said of going for a drive, engaging your mind just enough, kind of putting some music on, going to that store, walking around, and getting out of your normal pattern. Anything you do in your life that's on autopilot, you should audit it every once in a while, because you're missing out. If you're doing anything automatically, you're missing out, in my opinion. So shift things up, change things up. If you normally go to do X, Y, and Z, don't. Go to a comic shop and don't even do your normal. Oh, I always type on my phone. Fine. Stop by a Dollar General and buy a little notepad and a pen and just write notes and do that kind of stuff. For inspiration, it's really cool to see finished works and just be surrounded by this trove of them, because it will not only inspire you to create a finished work, but it shows you different art styles and different things. So that would be my thought. Just find a comic shop specifically, if not a Warhammer shop. I wouldn't recommend going to a gaming store. Well, why? Well, because I'm trying to get away from that. I'm not looking for another RPG. And even if they're the same, I'll go to the comic side of the gaming store. So I think that'll be it for me.
I think we have very different understandings of what a lightning round is.
I didn't know the best way to put it. I could tell, Tim, you were getting real into that, but it was like...
Yeah, I didn't want to stop you, but...
But it was good. Good answer.
It felt electrical. Is that...
It was. It was genuinely good advice, so I'm glad that you went into it. So yeah, 3 more and then we're done. Are you intentionally improving your player/GM skills? And if so, what are your best practices? So for me, I've gotten a lot of benefit out of trying to write things, because it gets me thinking about basically like how I think things should be done. Because it's one thing to just in the moment decide on like, I'm running the game right now. I need an answer to this question right now, and I just have to decide right now. And that's kind of most of the way that most things are sort of solved, I think, in tabletop games, is just sort of in the heat of the moment, deciding right now what needs to happen to keep things moving. So taking time to then step back and consider, like through conversations with other designers, me and Tim voice message a lot about what we think something should be, in a book and things like that. Those sorts of conversations can do a lot to sort of get you thinking of like, okay, no time limit, no sort of in this specific situation, but just sort of broadly, what's the best way to sort of construct these situations? And being able to talk about and answer those things, I think is a very useful way to then, when you start getting into those situations as a player and as a GM, you sort of have your own decision kind of backlogged in your mind of like, oh, I'm in the situation where I decided it would be better if I did this than that, so I'm going to do that. So yeah, I don't necessarily focus too much on like oh, let me really think about like how I can be better as a player. I could do more of that. Maybe I should. But that's kind of the way that I do it, is a lot of these sorts of discussions and just being able to talk about my thoughts and hear other people's thoughts, and develop that. And that usually translates really well into the game.
Yeah, for me, I find myself often intentionally trying to improve my skills as a GM. And this usually is manifested specifically in reading the section written for GMs in every RPG book I can get my hands on. In some cases, there are games I want to play or that have interesting rules, but in some cases, it's as simple as some of the best tips and like the largest insights I've ever gained have been from the non-rules sections of some rule books. And so that's the big thing as a GM, where I constantly am finding cool things like that in other games that aren't specific to that rule set, and then I can apply. And so that's really one of the most consistent ways I've found as improving as a GM. And then as a player, the biggest thing I struggle with, I'm not a perfect player, and I don't think there aren't things I can improve. But the thing I do intentionally try to do is try to remain extremely present during the games.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy for me to get distracted, and I imagine that that's similar for a lot of people. So I really focus, very mindfully try and go, okay, this person's talking, I want to hear what they're saying. Because it's easy to go, oh yeah, I forgot that I needed to do that modifier, and so I'm doing that. And then somebody calls my name, and I'm like, oh, that person was doing a really cool monologue, and I missed it for something that wasn't that important. So that's, for me, it's like just trying to stay focused on the game. And if somebody goes, oh, what'd you roll? I'm like, I'd rather spend time counting up my math than missing a cool roleplay moment.
Yeah, and so for me, I think as far as a game master, just keep playing, keep game mastering is really the way to get better at it. But if you really want to get better at it, run one online game a month, whether you broadcast it or not, and then watch it. How you think you sound and how you sound are very different. For better and for worse. There's times where you think you cracked it over the fence and you're like, I sound like I have marbles in my mouth. And then there are times where you're like, oh God, that was so flustered. And you're like, wow, that actually sounded fantastic. One game a month, record it online, whether you broadcast it or not, and then watch it back. And then as a player, ask yourself one simple question as often as you can. If I was game mastering this game, what would I want me doing? Like, put yourself in the shoes of the game master every once in a while. It's important for you to be in the moment and role play, but it is a game and the game master has prepared. So sometimes it's easy to forget that and just think, there are times where I'll know, hey, they're throwing that out there so someone bites because someone's got to go investigate the mayor. So yeah, it's a little meta, but I'm going to be the one that mentions it because no one else is mentioning it, and I don't want to just sit here for another 13 minutes role-playing the Attitude Piano. So I want to go and explore the mayor or whatever, because I know that, and it's like, you can almost see it in the game master's eyes. Somebody, please, God, bite this. Anyway, so that's something else I would suggest as a player.
Yeah, something a couple people say in the chat that'll kind of round up into one thing, which is they say like basically play on the other side of the fence that you normally are on. So if you GM a lot, then try to play a couple games. If you play a lot, try to run a couple games, because nothing puts you more in tune of like how you should act on one side than being on the other and desperately wishing that they would do the thing.
Yep.
Like exactly what you just said of like, if you know that feeling as a game master of like, here's this quest hook, please somebody please follow it because I don't really have much else for them to do right now. And then as a player, then when you get that hook, you can be like, okay, yeah, I'll bite, because I know if I was running this game that I would be waiting for somebody please to do that. So that can be a huge help. Next question from Jeremy. What systems are you looking forward to playing next? A lot of my friends are talking about Mothership right now. I'd love to try that. Gonna develop more Glyph and run more of that. I don't have a whole lot of system variety that I'm like really hunting for right now. I've got a lot going on outside of playing and running in terms of RPGs, so I'm pretty happy with my current stable, but I'd be happy to try. Mothership is the one that I'll say of like a lot of people are talking about it and I'd love to try it.
Yeah, Mothership was one I've heard a lot about. I'm a sucker for anything even remotely science fiction. I was this close to being in a Mothership game, but I think the day changed or something, so I just barely missed the boat that time around.
Those Mothershippers.
But it seemed very cool, right? Another one I recently learned that there's a comic called Fear Agent that I'm a really big fan of, and I recently learned that there was a Kickstarter for a Savage Worlds Fear Agent RPG. And I'm like, I've never wanted to play Savage Worlds more. So I'm like, I've heard, the system's been around a while. I'm sure it's cool and stuff. But to be able to play a themed Fear Agent RPG, it's like, yeah, I'll, if it was in any system, I would do it. So that's one I'm extremely excited about because it's just such a cool theme and stuff.
So it's funny. I would, if you'd caught me 10 hours ago, I would have said, I don't think there's really anything that I'm like, but I gotta tell you, James, I've not been able to stop thinking about the system you were pitching to me. He's pitching me that system that he was talking about earlier. To me, the one I'm looking most forward to trying is whatever it is you put together. I really want to start like noodling with that. And some of the ideas you had, I was like, we were having some pretty high level, at least armchair high level. Design
I was making lunch
talk.
while Tim was hanging out. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's making me Reuben sandwiches, but the point is that I'm like, the stuff he was describing, we're just like questioning everything. Like, why do we do this in RPGs and going through nothing is sacred. And some of the ideas that he was spitting at me and then I was kind of bouncing back. I was like, yeah. We need to work up a prototype. Maybe that'll be the thing we surprise debut at AtCon 2020. No pressure.
Oh yeah. That's the funny thing. My absolutely unrealistic goal is to have both of those things in some fashion that people can play or read them, which I think is impossible. But I'm excited.
You say that. We'll see. But anyway, that, yeah. So that's it.
Alrighty. Last question on the backlog, and then we'll be all set. What's your input on keeping the creative energy up and not getting drained?
So for me, I found personally that energy is sort of a zero-sum game to some degree, so that when people say creative energy, if I have no regular energy, I don't have creative energy, right? It's like there's a pyramid of the things you need that somebody came up with. And to me, I'm like, if I'm too stressed at work... What?
It's Laszlo's pyramid of
needs. Laszlo's pyramid, yeah. But the idea is that for me, I have to make sure that everything else in my life is going well. You know what I mean? If I get behind at work, I struggle with creative energy. And if I get a little bit sick, or sometimes if I don't take the right vitamins, I feel run down in a way that means I can't be creative. So I try to create an environment that I can be as creative as possible, while also letting myself off the hook when something outside of my power happens and I'm not feeling like creating. Obviously, when you have deadlines and stuff, it's different. But if I'm just trying to come up with cool ideas, I make sure that if I'm having trouble with that, I at least look inside and go, okay, well, am I having trouble because I'm not creative, or because I had a really hard day at work today, or I didn't sleep a lot last night, things like that. So I keep my creative energy up by remembering that sometimes you can't be as creative as at your best, and to accept that and just try to work against it where you can.
Sure. I say real quick, James, you already answered, but Jimmy, if you shoot us a message on the Tabletop Terrors Facebook page, we'll try to answer your question this week. And it's so you don't have to wait another month for us to appear like Pokemon in the wild and doing a live stream. So this is another one where it's like, there's no such thing as a lightning round on this for me. I'm sorry. It's just such an important part of my life, but I'll try. I'll try to make this at least a short lightning storm. It's super important that if you ask somebody like, hey, all right, cool. How do you build your endurance as a runner? And the answer is that you run. So the first thing that I tell people is that you should start being creative every day, even if you type 100 words. You have to build the muscles. You can't say like, hey, so how do you get buff? And it's like, well, you have to do the work. The next part of this is it's dangerous information to give to people who haven't done the work. So you don't want to tell someone who doesn't have the endurance they should rest. You don't tell someone who's grossly overweight trying to lose weight, like, yeah, what you need to do is just rest. So that's why I started by saying do the work. If you can, do the work, do the exercise, build up the endurance. Then understand that resting your weapon, your brain, resting this is more important than creating. It's sharpening the saw. If you cut down a forest, the axe will be dull, and every tree that you take down after the axe is dull is going to take twice as long. So it's a spiral. So what you need to do is you need to unplug and not feel guilty when you're not working. But the only way to do that is to consistently work. I know my limits. As James mentioned, we have deadlines and things like that. So the point is consistently work, consistently rest, and find a balance between those two things. And if you can find a balance between those two things, you won't get burnt out because your axe will be sharp. So when you're chopping down the forest, it feels good and it's fast work. And when you feel the axe is getting dull, stop and sharpen it. Spend time with your family. Spend time with people that you love. That's one of my favorite things to recharge myself. But the hack, the real answer, is find someone else to be creative with. Because the day that I am tired, Jeff has a sharper axe to hand me. And I go, oh, wow, yeah, this is exactly what I needed. And if you get a whole group of us together, let's just beat this analogy into the dirt. Well, now, deforestation, guys. I'm destroying the rainforest because there's a whole crew of people, Fern Gully style, and we're just putting X's on the trees. No, but seriously, if you have a bunch of people working together, you can make short work of the task and you don't get burnt out because you're not playing basketball full court by yourself like Snake Plissken. I'll end it there.
Yeah. Tim stole both of the things that I was going to say, so I'll very quickly recap and agree of just like, first of all, the only thing that I've ever found that has actually gotten me to be more efficient and more creative is other people's accountability and expectations and collaboration. Like that's the only thing that's definitely worked for me. Because that's something that I've struggled with a lot. Of like, I have so many ideas. I'd love to make stuff. I never feel like I can really put myself into it. What's going on? Like there's so much I want to do, and there's so little I'm actually doing. The second, literally the day that I became involved in other people's projects where I was talking to them and they, get these excitement feedback loops going and ideas and trading off, my productivity like septupled in a month. Like I wrote more since I've been part of Dead Man's Guide than I have like in my collective writing experience ever. Like other people can add such a huge dynamic to exploring ideas and having other people to get excited about your ideas, to tell you that they're cool, to give you feedback, to bounce ideas off of, to help you write some of it. Like it's such a huge boon, and it can be difficult to find the right people to give that part of yourself to. Because it can be a vulnerable part to give away sometimes. But if you can find the people who will do that, it makes a world of difference. And I can genuinely say that my productivity has skyrocketed just by having people that I can trust enough to for one, have that feedback, but also the accountability for me is an important thing. If you don't give me a deadline, I will not do it ever. Like, if you just say, do it whenever, it is not going to be done ever. And that's something that I had to look myself in the face and say, if I don't have a deadline, I will not do it. And I just need to be honest. Not, I will get to it. I promise I'll definitely get to it. No, I won't get to it. And I need to say that. I need to say that if I don't have somebody putting the pressure on me, I will not get to it. So get somebody to put the pressure on me, because if I don't, I won't do it. And I want to do it. It's not that I'm not doing it because I don't actually want to. I do want to. That's something that I need. I wish I didn't need it, but I do. So I have to build my creative life in a way that gives that to me. And then the second point after that, which I'll again reiterate, it's okay to be drained sometimes. As long as you can look and be able to give yourself that honest accounting of like, why am I actually not doing this? Is it because I'm drained, or is it because there are other things holding me back? Am I scared that when I do put this out, people will hate it? Am I scared that I won't be able to make what I want to make because I'm not good enough yet, and I need to develop my skills to make this vision real, and I'm scared to make it if it won't be what I want it to be? There's a lot that can go into feeling drained creatively, and sometimes it's other things in your life. Work's not going great, life's difficult, you have this medical thing, whatever it is. Sometimes it's fear. For me, that was the case, honestly, a lot. Like I needed some sense of confidence to be able to make what I wanted to make. And that necessitated other people helping me to validate that my ideas were good. There's a lot that can go into why you might feel drained. So You have to be able to look at yourself very honestly and be able to try to decode. And it might take a while to untangle the mess. It can be messy sometimes. But if you can figure out the source of it, and the source just is that you need a little bit of time to rest, then give yourself that time to rest. But if the answer is not that you need some time to rest, that it's something else, don't say you need rest if that's not actually what you need. You need to be able to be real to yourself about it, because if you can't be real, then you might think you need rest, or you'll tell yourself you need rest when really that's not what you need. And that's when it's a problem. So yeah, rest if you need rest, but if you don't need rest and you're still resting, figure out why and try to address it that way. And I'm saying all that just as much to me as to anybody else listening.
Sure. Well, and we'll wrap it up by saying, I've seen a lot of creators, and the reason why they're drained is because they don't have a finish line. Also, if I say I'm going to run a marathon, it gets a lot easier to push through the wall, the runner's wall, at the midpoint, because I know where my finish line is. If you don't know where your finish line is and you've run past the 26.2 or whatever the marathon mileage is, you're going to keep running until you collapse, because you don't know. You don't have a destination. So have a goal. It's way easier for me to stay up till 4 a.m. on a deadline because I know I could see the finish line. And it's the last 5 miles and they're difficult and my knees are killing me and I have to be up in 3 hours. But I mixed the metaphor there. But I actually ride on a treadmill. No, just have a goal. Have a goal. And it's easier to keep that goal. So I guess we'll call it here. Jimmy, send us that message about the wizard dragon question. And then I'm just going to end it real quick. Guys, tell me what's an album you're getting into lately? I want to hear because I want to listen to it this week. Give me an album. Anything?
Oh, you mean us? I don't know why I didn't think you meant us. I have no idea what to tell you about that. So not an album necessarily, but here comes
No, go ahead. My daughter's crashing the stream. You're live on the internet. Come here. Hi.
Yeah, I'm not going to try and take away from this show.
Yeah, go ahead. You go ahead. No, go ahead, James. She's not going to say anything. Uncle James is going to tell us an album that he's listening to.
Specifically, it's a song that's stuck in my head, and this is the opposite. Oh, yeah. This is the absolute.
No? She can't hear?
No.
Oh, hang on. He's going to say something inappropriate.
Not that bad. It's a song about all the types of things that truckers ingest to keep driving. Yeah, I know. So the chorus is trucker speed, which I found out is a pill they sell at a lot of gas stations. It's something called HCl, ephedrine. But he says trucker speed, Benzedrine, Black Beauties, amphetamines. And a lot of these are actually amphetamines. But that's a good example where I'm like, that song has been stuck in my head, where this guy gets bad news and his girlfriend broke up with him. And apparently he's taking all these drugs and doing what they call a West Coast turnaround, where you drive from one coast to the other without resting once. Obviously, you stop to get gas. But so, yeah, I'm really digging that song.
Nice. I love it.
Yeah, I don't have a full album right now that I've been listening to, but I actually sent you this song, Tim, already, but I'll say it on the stream too. The Spare Room Sessions version of Battle Creek by Bent Knee is a song that I've been super, super into lately. If you want to check that out. Super cool song. It's about basically someone kind of seeing the horrors of war firsthand and realizing kind of, like, oh God, is this really what we've made our people to do? That this is what we do? Kind of that vibe of song, but it's super cool. So yeah, check out Battle Creek by Bent Knee.
Killer.
That couldn't be more up my alley.
Yeah, right? I was just going to say, that's like a James Carney, like, custom-made album. So for me, and I won't get too deeply into it, but I've basically been using like one album per month to finish production on A Dead Man's Guide to Dragongrin. And my brother Matt got me into the album Reverence by the band Parkway Drive. Not usually my thing because it's extremely screamy, like, oh, yeah, welcome to a world of... But when you read, if you Google the story of how the album kind of came to be and why, there's a lot of tragedy surrounding it, like death and cancer and all kinds of stuff. And the sort of the things that they question on the album and the things they talk about, it could be considered very irreverent, but it's really interesting the way that they position it as reverence. But it's just, it's beefy and it's fat and it's just catchy enough, and their guitarists are just their drummers all hands too. Good feet, but like real fat tom work. So if you're looking for just like some good old-fashioned classic like hard metal, Parkway Drive's Reverence album is just my album for this month. It's really killing it. So guess we'll end it there, guys. You guys thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks for hanging out. This has been a lot of fun. I guess we need to make sure, if you want to grab a drink, let's finish it with a Tabtarian toast, right?
Yeah, but I'd like to see the struggle that it is, because I think the payoff will be worth it for your part to be said by your daughter instead of you, or at least with you.
Okay. Hey, when Uncle James raises his glass and says, "May you mend the first break," will you say, "May you kill the first snake"?
No.
Oh, she won't do it.
I mean, hey, listen, the worst somebody could say when you ask is
we
no,
do a toast.
so.
Are you sure you don't want to say? I'll say it with you.
No.
Well, she'll do it next time. We'll do it, and then she'll do it
No,
next
thank
time
you.
because she'll be so sad.
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
Okay.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything you undertake.
Will you say slancha?
No.
No.
She's way more chatty most of the time.
Yeah, no, she just knows there's everyone's watching.
Yeah, I know. I did put you super on the spot. But anyway, all right, everybody. Talk to you all soon. And until next time.
No.